Hi everyone, welcome to another FSElite interview, and I am joined by the Laminar Research team, and we're going to talk all about X-Plane and the future of it as well. So I'm joined by Austin and Ben. Now, before we dive into this interview, I just want to say, if you haven't already, go and watch the presentation after this interview, because there is going to be so much more content for you to find out about the future of X-Plane. This conversation is barely going to scratch the surface, and I know you guys are going to have a bunch of questions that I've only got like 6 or 7 that I can ask in this 30-minute period. But yeah, go watch the presentation and we'll talk more about it as well. So firstly, thank you both for joining me. I know you guys have had a hectic schedule, what with your changes last minute to the expo and you having to do a presentation, not being able to be there in person. But we have just seen you guys announce the future of X-Plane 12. So could you tell us a little bit more about the elements in particular, which I think are fan requested features and, you know, have been very high up on your priority list: seasons, weather, and also those clouds?
Ben, why don't you go first? Ben's going to talk about what I think the fans want, and I'm going to talk about what I always talk about, which is what I want. So let's let Ben go first to really answer your question.
Well, I think the weather system is probably the biggest one. I mean, there's so much in this release. Oops, sorry. Let's try that again. Sorry, we've all been up to about a gajillion o'clock in the morning, trying to get videos put together for Expo so we can show what's going on. But I think weather is probably the biggest single feature, and it's also just been a huge upgrade and change for us. I think it's a complete rewrite. I think that's not an exaggeration in this case. X-Plane 11's weather was static. It was 3-dimensional. You could fly through it, but with X-Plane 12, it's 4-dimensional. So the weather continuously changes over time as well as space. So finally, we have truly 3-dimensional clouds that you can actually fly through, that we're tracking in 3 dimensions out, hundreds of kilometers and up to 45,000 feet. But we're also taking them over time. And so you can actually see the system grow and evolve. Austin had done a bunch of work with Xavion, with getting real world data. And now finally that's made it into X-Plane. So we actually can take real world data, we can see it, we can grow it over time, we can change the weather. That's probably the single biggest thing we've done, although there's just a huge number of other features also in the release.
You see, I think Ben has kind of barely scratched the surface, though. I personally rewrote the weather system over the last, Ben, how long have I been rewriting the weather system? 45 days, 30 days, something like that?
More than that. It's been months.
Okay. It seems like a month and a half.
Like that. Yeah, no.
Yeah. What can I say? Time flies when you're having fun. But we've been at this now with X-Plane 12 for quite a few years. So, I mean, a new weather system, yeah, that's the most important thing. And it's based on global grid data, which is a mathematical forecast for the entire planet. And that lets us have weather everywhere on Earth, evolving over time. I've done all of the math on that code behind the scenes. Ben is doing the rendering on the clouds. But we have been basically not leaving our office for the last 2 years. Weather was like the last month and a half or 2 months of that. So I've done everything. I've rewritten the entire flight model addressing system so that every body, propeller, wing, motor is in what's called a vector of memory that we can expand or contract at will to set any number of props or wings or bodies we want in the simulator. I've rewritten the whole memory architecture of the sim. I've got just dozens of pages of hundreds of features. We've pretty much rewritten. I mean, it's now a short list to say what haven't we rewritten?
Yeah, that's correct. We have rebuilt the lighting model from the ground up. Every time we do a major version, we do a major lighting upgrade. So, first we had global illumination at night, and then we had physically based rendering so the materials look good. And finally, for the first time, we have a lighting model that actually works the way the real world works. So instead of the sun being yellow or white or something an artist picks, the sun is 1.6 giganits. because that's what the real sun is, right? It's really, really bright, it turns out. And then what color is the sky? The sky is whatever color the physics says it should be. So everything in the rendering engine has been rewritten this way. And that provides a foundation so that when we go to render clouds, or when we go to render airplanes, or we go to render rain or anything, we can perform real optical calculations and they all come together. So,
and what's so fascinating about this is I wrote blade element theory as my fundamental physics modeling for X-Plane, 20, 25 years ago. And now, and it took some time, that's for sure, but now, in addition to physics-based flight modeling, we have physics-based lighting. And so it's just the next step of getting a little closer to first principles. And as you start to move your code to first principles, all the limits and the preconceptions just start to fall away, and you're starting to build a platform you can do anything with moving forwards.
Right. So here's an example of why sometimes it's better to just use the real physics. In X-Plane 12, we can put water on the tarmac surface, right? So if it's raining out, like, you're going to have puddles everywhere. And that's part of what makes an airport look wet, right? And when we were first experimenting with this, I tried it, and it didn't look wet. It looked like there was plastic on the runway. And I couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with it because I'd very carefully done my math. It turns out that the problem was that the sky was not bright enough. And if the sky is too dim and you reflect a dim sky in a water puddle, it looks like plastic. It looks wrong. But if your sky is correct from day one, because it's based on the real physics of the sky, then if you do the real optics of a water reflection, it pretty much just looks like right from day one. So we've finally gotten to a point where all the elements can play together because they're much more physically correct than they used to be. It also parallels the flight model because if you go back in X-Plane time, the amount of ice you had on your airframe might be 70%, right? It was just a ratio between 0 is you're good and 100 is you're dead, right? And it was just something that increased over time. And the way it would increase would be nice, but now we know the mass of the ice on the airframe, right? Like, these things are actually physically calculated. If you know the mass of the airframe, you can say more about how the flight dynamics are. And this is what's happened with the rendering engine too. We've gone from the sky is 4 times as bright as the ground to the sky is 21,000 nits, right? That's an actual number. So we finally, in the rendering engine, started reaching those real world units to give us precision that the physics model, I would say, has been getting for the last couple of years.
Wow, okay. So I can imagine a lot of people are going to be thinking, all of this stuff now being rendered, what's the impact on performance? And you mentioned in your presentation a lot about how a lot of this stuff is now being shipped over to like the GPU to manage and to render. So what does that actually mean in terms of performance for simmers? And you know what they're like in terms of getting as many frames as they possibly can.
Right. It's going to mean a couple things. We should be pushing the GPU harder. Now that we're using Vulkan and Metal, we can actually talk to the GPU the way it wants to be talked to. We're using asynchronous compute, which is a way to get more math power out of the GPU while it's rendering. So we're going to do more math, but we're also going to get some untapped resources, which I think will help compensate for that. We are painfully aware that GPU prices are completely crazy right now. I've been doing this for a while, and it's frustrating for us that flight simmers can't just upgrade to the top tier GPU as easily as you could, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. That was not a big purchase back in the day. And now, a 3080 that's a really hard card to get. But we're going to try to use the GPU more efficiently, and we're going to try and provide a range of rendering options so that people can trade off between maximizing visual fidelity. For example, if you're okay with 30 FIPS and you really want to see things pop, or if what you really care about is sort of the twitch response and you want 60 FIPS, you're flying fighters, then maybe you can back off some of that detail but still keep some of it. And over time, GPUs are still getting faster. It's frustrating right now that prices are so crazy and that we can't access that bleeding edge for reasonable amounts of money. But the 3000 series is a fantastic set of cards. They're much faster than what came before. The AMD second generation RDNA cards also have a lot of killing power. I've got a first gen one in my iMac behind me, and it does quite well. So I think the technological progress with GPUs is really good, and we're getting access to that power. So I feel good about us moving that computing to the GPU.
Awesome. So my next question is a little bit more away from, well, you talk about the world quite a lot in your presentation, and another element of the world is the Autogen and how you display roads, cities, towns, etc. So why did you guys decide to go down the Autogen route as opposed to what other simulators are doing in terms of rendering this world?
So that was a decision I actually made a really long time ago, and I haven't seen anything to really make me want to change my mind yet. So initially, I did Autogen for a pretty clear reason. I could write an algorithm, have buildings all over the entire planet, and this was back before Google Earth or anything like that existed. But as time has gone by, and I've looked at people provide these gigantic like ortho photos with real scenery, the memory requirement goes through the roof, the load time goes through the roof, the stutters of the simulator go through, start increasing. And when X-Men is used for actual flight training, any stutter at all will break FAA certification like that. And it takes me out of the moment from a realism standpoint. I don't want this sim to pause forever to load. I don't want it to stutter. And whether or not a restaurant is an actual Denny's or a generic brand X restaurant, that to me doesn't impact the realism of the flight. What impacts the realism of the flight is the airplane flying accurately, smoothly, and continuously over the world. So for me, it's really not close. I need something that loads fast, runs smooth, doesn't stutter, with scenery that is good enough that you're like, okay, I'm flying an airplane over this city. This is an industrial area. This is a residential area. This is forest. This is farm fields. And they have to look good and believable so you can focus on what matters, which is flying the airplane. So if you want to look at Google Earth or something like that, great. But what I want to do is fly an airplane, and minimizing load time, RAM, and stutters is absolutely critical. And something else, when I go to these scenery viewer type sims and zoom way in, all of a sudden the limited resolution starts to become obvious. Cars look like they're post-apocalyptic and melted down onto the pavement, and the paint is all flowing out onto the concrete. The signs all melted down like a Twilight Zone episode or something. It's great, this concept of having a complete, perfect, exact copy of the real world. It's a wonderful concept. But what I want to see is a crisp, clear, precise, good-looking, well-rendered world that renders smoothly and continuously, while you can fly through with a great flight model. And having artists build art assets to fit the OSM data that defines the world is doing the best job that we can do with that right now, as I see it.
It's worth noting also, just for full disclosure, that we don't actually own a international global mapping company that will give us mapping data. So, I think we like a lot of things we get out of Autogen, but also, it's what we got. Our team has seen what people are doing with orthophotos. And, in a lot of cases, when you zoom in, you lose crispness, right? Whereas Autogen has is deep metadata. You know that a car is a car. You know that something is grass, and therefore it changes with seasons. You have a lot of information about how the world responds dynamically.
Because you built the world.
That's right.
You copy polygons without having any idea what the polygon is. You
That's
build
right.
the world from the ground up. And when you build the world from the ground up, you can make it move. You can make it react to wind and light and shadows and have cars drive. And more things of that are going to happen in the future.
Right.
What I really want to move towards is a dynamic world, not a blind pile of polys that were collected by a drone on a given moment in time.
Right. I think in the long term, we will actually be able to use orthophotos, but we're not going to show them. What we're going to use them as an import source, just like we use NASA data to know where there's a mountain and OpenStreetMap data to know where there's roads. The orthophoto data does tell us something, but it shouldn't be, what should I draw in my sim? It tells you a little bit about the land, right? When you're trying to answer questions like, there's some grass here. Is it green, lush, irrigated grass, or is it dead and dry because the DPW backs their pickup trucks on it, right? That's the kind of nuance and really subtle detail that orthophotos deliver that I think users want. But I think we'll be able to incorporate that eventually into Autogen, so we have that sort of sense of place and what's going on, but we will still be creating the final image so we can have the precision that we've gotten used to. Right? We don't want to compromise on precision to get more accuracy, but we can go further with accuracy.
And when we use this raw orthophoto data to build the virtual world that we're creating, the resolution is basically unlimited. So it's like the ultimate in upres.
Right. And yeah, and you don't need the fanciest orthophotos to do it, because you're trying to just answer the question, okay, OpenStreetMap told us a lot. They told us there's a post office. They told us the name of the post office. We don't care. They told us the roads. We know what country we're in. But what's that abandoned lot, that little dead space? That's the sort of the last mile of Autogen that's very hard to fill in, is the in-between spaces. And an orthophoto, even if it's not super high res, gives us something that we can use to be more realistic when we fill it in. And flight simulators always want more accuracy. And there's more we can do with that. And there's more we can do with OpenStreetMap, which is still a unmined treasure trove. So for X-Plane 12, one of the things we're doing is going back to OpenStreetMap and just importing more data, because it's there and because it can make the sim more accurate.
And that'll let us build a real vacant lot, for example, to answer Ben's question, rather than having a grainy, miscolored satellite photo with the top of a car painted onto the dirt, because that's what was parked at the moment a drone flew over. This will let us build something that really looks like a vacant lot. And when you land your helicopter there, you're not going to see, the top of a porta potty that was left on the lot, but only painted onto the dirt like a strange Twilight Zone episode.
No, we need a 3D porta potty, right?
We'll build the real porta potty.
Yes.
So speaking of things like Autogen and things that you're building, you showed off the trees and the forests and stuff like that in a preview video a couple of weeks ago.
And could you have ever gotten those trees from a satellite flyover? No way. We've got individual branches and leaves and shadows, and they're moving in the wind. You can't get that with just a satellite, or radar topography of the world. This is why you have to build the world from the ground up.
Right. Peter, our lead scenery artist, had told us a while ago, he said, I want to try 3D trees. And we're like, seems like it might be expensive. Are you sure? And then he showed us and we're like, yeah, we're going to have that.
Make it happen.
He did it, and it looks so good. So we're super happy about that.
And one of the other elements you guys showed off in that video was seasons. Now, obviously, that was another big feature request and something X-Plane fans have wanted and yearned for ages. And we're finally getting them in X-Plane 12. So do you care to kind of talk us a little bit about how seasons will work in the sim and what your expectations are?
So I've been doing this for a while, and when I started, what seasons meant was just that you had 4 versions of the texture, and there was a white one and a yellow one and a green one and an orange one. And it was still a hard feature to do because your art team had to do 4 times as much stuff. But that was 2 decades ago, and I don't think anyone would ever accept that as a season feature now. So we're doing something quite a bit more complex. Our scenery data has the climate data analyzed and put into the scenery so that we know when the seasons hit. And then we use that indirectly based on the data of the sim to go look up what the right type of foliage is, for example. So I'm up in the Boston area, and so something that we see is that foliage season hits up north in Vermont first because it's northern, it's colder, they got some higher mountains, and then the foliage moves south. And if we miss it here, maybe you can go apple picking down in Connecticut. It's a little further south. So it's a spatial phenomenon because the climate is different based on latitude and other factors. So we have that data when we build the DSFs. So we encode it in, and that way, as you fly, you'll see the correct seasonal response. An airplane easily has the range to cover those latitudes, and so you can see the season changing underneath you as you fly. And the rendering engine can interpolate between the seasons so that you don't go, summer, fall, right? In a perfectly straight line going across the scenery. Instead, we create a gradual transition as the date of fall slowly changes as we change the climate.
Right. And so you talk about the fall, but you got winter as well. Are we going to see frozen lakes and kind of how cold temperatures react to the world?
Right now, winter is leaves off trees. It does not have snow in it. And that's because we think snow is a weather phenomenon and not a seasonal phenomenon. There are parts of the X-Plane world that are perma-snow, right? If you go up to the top of the Alps, I think there's always snow there. But we put snow in the same bucket as rain, which is we want to add it in dynamically using shaders. Because if you're flying and it starts to snow, you don't expect, boom, everything's a white winter wonderland, right? You might expect that snow to build up gradually. So we've tried to keep snow with the rain on the ground entirely dynamically within shading. So it's something that we can dial in based on the scenario.
Cool. Okay. And so we've talked a lot about the world and stuff then, seasons, weather, Autogen. Are you guys going to be communicating with third parties in terms of how they can still engage and interact with the X-Plane environments going forward?
Oh, absolutely. We'd like them to get the beta first. Like after Expo, our next milestone is to get a build that we can get into the hands of third-party developers so they can start working with it, getting us feedback, updating their aircraft. I don't know what the interaction between third-party add-ons and the weather system will be, because the weather system is just much more capable than it used to be. It used to be that interaction was give us a METAR file and we'll slurp it up. And that was easy and simple because that's all there was. But we can do so much more now, right? We can take snapshots of the weather over space and time. So we need to define how they're going to interact with us for that. And I think we'll be taking requests because the underlying engine is very capable.
Cool. Okay, I'm sure third parties will be pleased to hear they're going to get some access to all of this.
Right. And all of the scenery features, seasonalizing your scenery, 3D trees, third parties can use this, and they can also create their own content. So if you make a DSF, you can decide where the seasons are. If you want to make your own 3D trees, you can use our exporter and model them yourself. If you want to add detail or there's a species that we didn't get. But if you're making an airport, we're going to ship a complete 3D tree library, and they can also just use that. So on both sides, third parties can participate. We view the scenery system as a platform. So there's no part of this like only Laminar can make trees. We want everybody to make trees.
Amazing. So I want to move away from the world just for a second and talk a little bit about aircraft. So again, a few weeks ago, you teased the A330, which is going to be your first ever Airbus aircraft that you've developed for X-Plane. Do you want to talk us a little bit more about why you chose the A330 and what features we can expect when it does come out?
Well, first of all, we were due for an Airbus. We'd done a series of Boeings and we'd done no Airbuses, and I think people expected it. We also wanted to put a larger plane in the sim. We already have the MD-82 and the 737. So, we thought a wide body would be a better complement to the fleet. Austin, how long ago did you do the Airbus fly-by-wire work?
Some time ago. So whether an airplane is a wide body or a narrow body, though, that's not exactly the defining factor in what it's like to fly in a flight simulator. What I want to see in a flight simulator, in addition, of course, to giving airplanes that show the European technology and commerce, I want to have an airplane that flies like an Airbus. If it is an Airbus, it needs to fly like an Airbus, not like a Boeing. So it's not the fact that it's a wide body that matters. What matters is it's got the Airbus flight control system, which is completely different than the Boeing system. And I have some professional A320 pilots that are using X-Plane to build a professional certified flight simulator. And so I sent them to A320 with the Airbus fly-by-wire system, which is common between the 320 and the 330 as far as the rules go. And we got that system dialed in with full-time A320 pilots until they said, yes, this flies like the real airplane. And it got to the point where I was like, is there anything else I need to tweak in this model to make this feel just like the real plane? They said, we can't ask for any more than this. So our Airbus flight control system has been dialed in to the point that a daily A320 pilot cannot see any improvement to make. And so dropping that, again, aircraft common flight control system into the 330 combined with our latest Artist technology delivers an airplane that looks and flies like a 330. And, when I first heard we're going to do an A330, I was like, okay, now we got a Boeing, now we got an Airbus, big deal. But the moment I got into that airplane in X-Plane and I applied power, and those triple spool engines took so long to spool up, and then the airplane took so long to get moving. And eventually I'm doing 200 knots in like this 500,000-pound airplane. Like, let me just, flop this thing back around to land. I yank the throttle back and that thing is still cruising, having only shed 10 knots, 10 minutes later. It's like, right. Oh my God, this thing is huge. It is so big. It is so heavy. It is so slow to respond. You get that weight moving and it just wants to keep moving across the sky. It doesn't have any drag. You have got to plan in advance. And what's so fascinating about this airplane is the flight control model makes it so easy to fly that you can just take your hands off the stick and it'll do nothing forever. But trying to change a flight path, change an altitude, change a speed, it's like an event that has to be planned 30 minutes in advance because there's so much weight and so little drag. So it is an incredible, incredible airplane to fly. And I didn't truly understand how big an A330 was until I flew it in X-plane. That was when my realization came that what an incredible, incredible machine this is. And how much thought is really required to operate it properly, because it's the opposite of what I'm used to flying, of course, which is this tiny little carbon fiber airplane that will speed up or slow down in 5 seconds flat. So yeah, the 330, the wide body, yeah, okay, that's one way of saying it's big. That does not communicate the experience of what it's like to fly this airplane.
It's a wide body.
And long and big and heavy
massive.
and so low drag. And so I think X-Plane is really going to do an incredible job of communicating what it is like to move 500,000 pounds across the sky like that.
And the art team has also just put a ton of detail into it. So in X-Plane 11, the 737 was our flagship airliner, and it was probably the most detailed airliner we've ever shipped. And we've got at least that much detail, probably more in the A330, even though it's a bigger aircraft with more stuff to see. So it's been pretty fantastic. And I
rewrote the landing gear model just for this one airplane. So the A330 has this like eagle claw gear, but it's not there just for looks. When the bottom gear hits in this eagle claw, it starts compressing the main shock absorber, but it's only compressed at like a 1/3 rate. Like for every 3 feet that the aft tire comes up, the shock absorber only compresses 1 foot, the way it's all geared up. And so the beginning of your landing is so smooth. And then the force builds up once the gear comes down flat and starts compressing the shock absorber 1-to-1. And so the whole landing feel of the airplane is different. And I probably spent 3 days banging my head against the math to get it just perfect. And like the ultimate in the A330 is to roll along with your back gear on the runway and your front gear up in the air and just kind of roll it that way, because you have to have it absolutely perfect since the shock absorbers are so soft for that first little bit of the contact. And it makes the real A330 feel different on landing when you get the smooth touch before the real force comes in from the shock absorbers. All of that is simulated. And I mean, I get weekly reports from all the artists, no matter where they're located. They're down to every like emergency synoptic screen in the avionics and all the ways you cycle through warnings in the actual A330 avionics. So yeah, it's an amazing, amazing, amazing airplane. And it's been a way more exciting challenge than I thought it would be to get it into X-Plane. But now that it's here, it is just such an incredible beast to fly.
Amazing. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people out there excited to try this out.
Yeah, I wasn't excited until I tried it. Then I got excited.
Amazing. So we are starting to run out a bit of time. There is one more feature I just want to touch on very quickly, and that is the ATC features, which took a big chunk of your presentation time up. So please just kind of, if you can, give us a brief overview of what has changed with X-Plane 12 with regards to the ATC system.
No, you're not talking to an ATC coder right now. I hired a person just for that, Jim Keir. I think he's over in England, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I think he's in your time zone. Maybe we should have gotten him on this call. But Ben, have you been watching over Jim's shoulder at all to answer that question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
Ben,
like the rest of it, the short answer is approximately everything. He's gone over the entire system, adding detail, fixing bugs, adding additional ways to fly. We were adding VFR flight. In 11, you had to file IFR. In 12, you can fly IFR and VFR. He's got regionalized voice packs now with local accents, which when I first heard that, I was like, okay. But then I flew into Heathrow and called up ATC, and it's an English guy in the tower, and it's surprisingly immersive. Everything about all the audio has been redone, and it's just a much more seamless experience. It sounds more fluid. It sounds more like real ATC. The user interface has also been rebuilt, so it's much easier to see the transcripts. All the ground services have been integrated with ATC, so it's one seamless, high quality, nice looking situation. I think it's going to be just a much nicer air traffic control system to fly. We've wanted to put an upgrade in for a while. And Chris had done some work on VFR, and then Jim took it from him and has taken it quite a bit further.
Amazing. Like you guys said, there's other people within your team who specialize in all these types of things. So I think what we'll do is eventually try and schedule some time with your ATC expert and do kind of a more in-depth look at that type of stuff. And of course your presentation as well, which people can go back and watch from Expo as well. They can learn a little bit more about that. So my final question before we wrap things up here, Ben, you mentioned a little bit about kind of the beta release. Is there anything you can talk about in terms of the expected public release and how people can eventually get their hands on X-Plane 12?
I don't know when people will be able to get their hands on the early access, but we are absolutely planning to do an early access for the public. It's basically just a question of when we have something that's enjoyable to fly. As soon as we have it, we're going to let people do it. But we're going to try and get developers into a private beta before that, because they're in a situation where even if not all the features are ready to be used, they want to get working on their aircraft. And we get really good feedback from them about problems in the sim we might not have seen because they don't happen in our fleet, or feature requests to make it easier to work with X-Plane. So that's our next milestone after Expo. And basically when private developers are using it and people are having a flight experience where we can do early access, we're going to jump right into it because we want to get there as soon as we can.
One thing I want to make clear, though, and this is completely obvious, I think, to both me and Ben, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because people ask me they still ask me about this from time to time. Will my X-Plane 11 work carry forward into X-Plane 12? The answer is yes. We switched our aircraft to a label-based format, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And with this label-based format, each bit of the aircraft has like a label associated with it and the data associated with that label. And so as we go to new formats, new aircraft, new airfoils, new everything, we can still get 99% of the goodness from the previous file formats. So an X-Plane 11 airplane absolutely will open right up and fly in X-Plane 12. And I mean, probably 20% of our development time or more, maybe 25% of our development time, at least on mine, has been spent making sure that we also, everything I do, it has to be able to read in an X-Plane 11 aircraft and still function. So as far as people thinking, well, when can I start, developing for X-Plane? You can start today by developing for X-Plane 11. You're going to get an 85 or 90% carryover.
We have a document listing the changes that have been made to the flight model so that when people get their hands on the private beta, they can go through it and look. So for example, Austin has done a bunch of work on engines and also a bunch of work on propellers that's new to 12. So, having discovered that the dynamics of propellers can be more realistic, that changes the flight model. And if you had an aircraft where the engine torque had been cheated a little bit because the propeller dynamics weren't quite right, you're going to need to put a more accurate number in. And all those kinds of things are listed so that hopefully third parties won't spend a lot of time going, I wonder what changed, and just say, oh, okay, I need to go down this checklist and that's going to get me upgraded to the new stuff. I can make sure my numbers are dialed in, and then they can start adopting the new features.
But the bottom line is I'm working with a company called Beta right now, which is making an electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane, and uses 4 rotors to lift up and then 1 to push forward. And they use X-Plane for flight testing the actual vehicle. And once they've done all their flight tests in the simulator, they go out and fly the real airplane. And so X-Plane is constantly being compared to real flight test data and to data from other much, thousands of times more expensive simulators and computational fluid dynamics. And computational fluid dynamics runs at something like 1 frame every 2 days, to give you an idea of the frame rate of computational fluid dynamics, 2 days to pop out an answer. And so while X-Plane might be running 40 frames in a second, computational fluid dynamics runs 1 frame every 2 days. We're comparing the results and they're extremely close. So I'm really dialing in the propeller dynamics. And what's so fascinating about this VTOL airplane is with 4 rotors lifting and 1 pushing, that gets the helicopter dynamics, the airplane dynamics, and this thing has wings, the wingborne dynamics. This is one vehicle that is like a full blade element theory test of all the different things I can do being compared against aerospace, grade prediction tools. X-plane's batting right there alongside them. And so the accuracy is just continuing to get better as we keep raising the bar. And so what that means is your version 11 airplanes, to get back to your question, yeah, your version 11 airplane will still work in X-plane 12, but you may be well served to go and work on your propeller, twist and design speed and airfoils and thickness and whatnot. And hopefully you won't have to have any tweaks or cheats in there, as Ben alluded to, at all. And you will have to dial the dynamics and shape. You'll have to dial the shape of your propeller and the available horsepower and the airfoil sections that you use to have your aircraft meet the flight model that we're bringing to bear here.
Yeah, this is certainly the most heavily validated in reality iteration of the flight model we've ever had.
Right. I'm sure plenty of developers are scratching their heads already trying to figure out what can I do to make the best aircraft or airport possible for the new sim. So I just want to say thank you both for your time. Obviously, you guys have the landing challenge as well happening at Expo. You're both looking forward to seeing the results of those come the weekend.
It was pretty entertaining to watch last time. We'll see what happens this time.
I got a trick up my sleeve, and the trick will already been revealed, I guess, by the time this interview airs.
Yeah.
All right, so your interview is waking me up a little bit. I was starting to get a little sleep deprived and tired, but I have time for another question or two. If you feel like, if you're at the end of the list, great. But if you got 1 or 2 more questions you're dying to shoot out, I'm right here.
I'm at the end of my list.
Okay, well, there you go.
But I do appreciate the offer nonetheless. I'm sure that we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk more about X-Plane 12 because that document is massive. Your presentation is going to be full of features. I mean, we haven't even touched on like the sound design and the environment, stuff like that. So
the scope is crazy. I mean, it's, everybody on the team has added something major to the new release.
Perfect. So I think
you're sitting here interviewing 2 people right now, but 2 people is not the size of the Laminar Research team. No. We're up to maybe 20 or so people at this point.
Probably about that. The fact that we don't know the exact number offhand shows how different this is from, X-Plane 10 was 6, like exactly 6, right?
We're over 30.
No. Yeah, including the tech support and marketing and stuff like that. Our weekly report is now up to 30 people involved in the project.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, I know you guys have lots to do in terms of the Expo stuff. I've thoroughly enjoyed learning a little bit more about X-Plane 12, and obviously I'm sure people watching who've watched your presentation have also enjoyed it as well. So the last thing I just want to say is thank you very much. Obviously we're recording this before the show. I hope it all goes well. I hope people enjoy the presentation that you guys have, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again very soon in the coming weeks, going a little bit more in depth about some of those other features we didn't get time to talk about today.
Great.
Right. Once people have their hands on the sim, once we're in private beta or early access, we can do more in depth once people have had a chance to actually touch it.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much both, and we will speak to you again soon.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Galen.